and welcome to Unity Presbyterian Church Online. This week in worship, Pastor David begins a series on the life of Joseph, the dreamer. Let's listen.
All families have some conflict from time to time. I mean, it's nearly impossible when you have people of different personalities and you put them so close together as they're living side by side that you're not going to have disagreements pop up from time to time. So, what's the source of disagreements in your household? The things that come up the most often? Is it when to turn on the heat for the year? Is it now? Is it in a couple of weeks? It's getting a little cooler at night, but I don't know. I don't know if it's time quite yet. Or is it the person who washes dishes by just soaking them in the sink? And maybe they soak for, a day, two days. They're just kind of there, just soaking. But they're being washed. There's all sorts of ways that we can maybe get into disagreements with the people we live with. Maybe it's that person that just leaves the lights on in all the rooms, no matter if they're in the rooms or not. Or that person who leaves wet towels just on the floor. The hanger's right there, but they're on the floor. Or the person who just doesn't replace the empty toilet paper rolls. I mean, there's many possibilities. I'm sure you can add your own to this list. Now, all of these are fairly common and also fairly minor in the grand scheme of things. But what about those family disagreements that are a bit more substantial? I mean, some of us came from family systems that we would classify as dysfunctional. I mean, perhaps there was a lot of yelling in the house you grew up in, or a lot of anger, or maybe there was just the absence of trust in your family. Well, we're going to study a story in the Bible about a very dysfunctional story, or dysfunctional family. You can see who we're studying for the next 4 weeks. We're going to look at Joseph. We're going to look at the dreamer. Because if you think your family had a lot of conflict growing up, it probably did not hold a candle to Joseph's family. And so the questions that I want you thinking about as we study this story over the next 4 weeks are: how did Joseph learn to follow God in spite of his very tough family situation? I mean, how has Joseph become an example of our faith despite all the conflict that surrounded him for the majority of his life? Yes, we will study the life of Joseph today. Now, Joseph is introduced to us in Genesis, the first book in the Bible, in chapter 37. So here in verse 2, pay attention to how Joseph is described. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Okay, what have we learned about Joseph so far just from this one verse? Well, what I see is that he had brothers. That's right, Joseph had brothers, and Joseph actually had 11 other brothers. I had 2 brothers, and I know how rambunctious my family was. I cannot imagine having 11 other brothers. And Joseph was almost the youngest. He was the second young. He was the 11th brother in that family system. Was anyone the youngest brother in this here? No? Oh, yeah, there we go. We got a couple. You might be able to identify some with how Joseph feels in this story. He was also 17 years old. How did you feel when you were 17-year-old? What was your life like at that point? You were probably a senior in high school. You were probably thinking about, okay, what comes next in my life? Is it college? Where do I want to go? Is it a career? What's my vocation? Maybe you felt a mix of excitement because the future was so unknown, but also some trepidation, not really sure what's going to happen. And I bet as a 17-year-old, you were a bit idealistic about what was possible. I think you'll see some of that in Joseph's life as well. We also learned that Joseph's father, Jacob, had multiple wives. Now, this unfortunately was common during this time period in the book of Genesis, but it led to some very messy family dynamics. So his older brothers, their mothers were Bilhah and Zilpah, but only Joseph and his youngest brother, Benjamin, were born from Jacob's true love, and that was his wife, Rachel. And this made Joseph the favorite child. Do you think that has the potential to cause some friction maybe between Joseph and his other brothers? Well, let's read on and find out. Verse 4, now Jacob, the father, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Well, this is probably playing out exactly as you would expect it to play out. I mean, if a parent openly favors one child, how are the rest of the children going to feel? They hated Joseph. They knew that their father Jacob loved him more than any of them, and they despised him for it. Now, you can't pick the family that you grow up in. Some of us were blessed with loving and stable homes, and others might be more characterized by chaos in the families that we grew up in. For better or worse, we were all impacted by the family systems that raised us. Unfortunately, for Joseph's family system, favoritism has really poisoned the well there. It has led to a bit of an overinflated ego for Joseph, and it's led to the seeds of jealousy and hatred for his brothers. Now, this is probably a good time to remind all parents, don't pick a favorite among your children. I mean, yes, some may be easier to get along with others, but they are all your children, given to you by God. So you must love them and treat them all equally. Jacob is unafraid to show his favoritism towards this one son, Joseph. And so as a physical representation of his favoritism, he gives him an ornate robe that he can wear so that everyone else can see, look, this is my favorite son. This is probably the point in the sermon where the songs from Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice's musical pops into our heads, right? Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. All right, who remembers this one? Did anyone see this one? Yeah, absolutely. Yes, so our translation says ornate robe. It's the NIV translation. But the actual Hebrew can mean either robe or coat, and it can mean multi-layered, so it would have multi-layers in the coat, or multi-colored. And so, most likely, Joseph's coat probably looks like something like this next image. This is something that would stand out. This is something that would be really valuable in this time period. And this was a gift that was only given to one son. This was given to Joseph. This would be like your father giving you for your 16th birthday a brand new car, and then giving all your other brothers shoes from Goodwill, saying, have fun walking everywhere. This put a target on Joseph's back. Now, I will say, Joseph doesn't help himself by what he does next. Here's the next verse. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. Listen to this dream, he said. We were out in the field, tying up bundles of grain. Suddenly, my bundle stood up, and your bundles all gathered around and bowed low before mine. His brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. All right, we are told once again that Joseph's brothers hated him. This is becoming a recurring theme, isn't it, in our scriptures today? And this time, they hated him all the more because he had the audacity to share a dream that he had with them. Now, there are two ways to look at this. There's two ways to interpret this dream here. The first is that he's just being an insolent little brother, right? That he knows he's the favorite, and he's just rubbing it in. He's like, guess what? I had a dream, and you're all bowing down to me. You like that dream? Yeah. That's one possibility of what's happening here. But there's a second possibility as well. And the second is that this dream is actually from God. That God has given this almost as a prophecy of what the future will one day hold. That one day, Joseph will actually rule over his brothers. Now, it is only because we know the end of this story that we know which of these possibilities is true. By the end of Joseph's stories, which we'll get to in 3 weeks, he is one of the most powerful people in the country of Egypt. He is number 2 to Pharaoh alone. He is one of the most looked after people in this entire country who rules not only over his brothers, but over the majority of Egypt. Yes, as we continue to read this story, what you'll find out is that the dream comes true. Now, have you noticed? God has not yet been mentioned in this story. It's only by knowing the end of the story that we know that this is an image of God here, that God has actually given this dream to Joseph. Now, what you're going to see as we study the totality of Joseph's story is the mysterious movement of God's providence. Now, providence is a churchy word, but here's what it means. Providence is God's ability to work out God's plans and purposes through all things. Now, here's what that means. It means that you and I can make any choices we want. God has given us free will. We are not robots. We can make good choices or bad choices, and God is going to allow the natural consequences of those choices to occur, because that is what free will is all about. But God is actively working out God's plans and purposes throughout all of the choices that humanity makes. Now, it may be easier for God to get God's work done if humanity makes good choices, but even when we make bad choices, we cannot thwart the will of God. No, God's providence means that God is going to continue working through all of humanity's choices to ultimately achieve God's purposes. Now, as a church and as Christians, we want to align ourselves with the work of God. Whenever we see God's will in action, whenever we get a sense of the Spirit of God, we want to head in that direction. We want to say, okay, I want to work with you, God. I don't want to work against you. But even if we feel like in certain times, a good portion of the world might be working against the purposes of God, we can still be confident in God's mysterious and beautiful providence being on display. You're going to see that truth at work in Joseph's stories. Joseph is going to have God work through his life, and particularly his dream. Not because God wants to elevate Joseph, but because through Joseph, God's plans and purposes will be achieved. Now, with the entrance to the dream, we have our first major conflict happen in this story. It's a conflict between the dreamer and the killers of the dream. See, Joseph's brothers, they're out in the field and they are shepherding the sheep. And Joseph's father, Jacob, sends Joseph. He said, go check on them. Go see how your brothers are doing. I mean, he's not out in the fields. He's the favorite. He's at home. He's like, go check on them and just see if they're doing all right. And they see him from a distance. Can you guess how they noticed him? Maybe a really bright robe that they're seeing from a long way off. And they see those colors and they begin grumbling to themselves. They begin getting angry. Oh, there's Joseph. There's the favorite. He's coming out here again. And then they begin plotting to kill their brother Joseph. Skipping ahead now to verse 20. The brothers say, "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." Yes, unfortunately, dreamers are often killed in this world because dreamers are people who invite us to look at the world from a new perspective. They invite us to look at what is possible, not just what is. And to those who prefer for everything to just stay the same, to not change, to just maintain the status quo, dreamers can be very dangerous. The brothers, they want to kill Joseph, and they want to kill the dream. This is in the book of Genesis. So this is just a couple of generations after Cain killed Abel. And now we have another set of brothers who are intent on shedding blood. Now Joseph at this moment, he's away from the safety of his home, and he's away from the protection of his father. Here's how the story progresses. When Reuben, this is the oldest brother, when he heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. "Let's not take his life," he said. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing, and they took him and threw him into the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it. All right, here's a picture of a cistern to help get your imaginations going into what was happening to Joseph in this moment. It was basically a well, but a well without any water in it. And we're not told how deep it went, but I surely would not want to be thrown into one. But that's what happens to Joseph. Now, before they decide to throw him into the cistern, they strip him of the robe. They take off that symbol that was the symbol and representation of the favoritism of their father. They take that off in hopes of taking away the favoritism that so poisoned their family. They strip him of the robe, and then they toss him into this well, leaving him for dead. But instead of just leaving him there, well, God has other plans. A group of traders comes up, trading goods and services, and they are on their way to Egypt. And the brothers think, oh, we can make a quick buck. We can sell our brother to these traders and just sell him into slavery. So I don't know your relationship with your brothers and sisters, but if you've ever thought about selling them into slavery, just know that's a biblical thought. That's right here in Genesis chapter 37. They say we can sell him, and then we'll be rid of the dream, we'll be rid of the favoritism, and we'll be rid of our problems. And so, when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. So with Joseph gone, they take the robe, that prized possession, and they kill one of the goats, and then they dip the robe in the blood of the goat, and then they scuff it up, they tear it up to make it look like Joseph was eaten by a ferocious animal. And then they bring that robe back to their father, and they say, look, this robe that you gave to your favorite son, this is all that's left of it. Your son has been killed. They create a lie. They deceive their father, and their father believes them. Their father believes that his favorite son is dead, and he begins to go into a period of mourning that lasts for days and for weeks. Now, this is where we're pausing our story today. Like, we'll pick it up in the next couple of weeks, but we're pausing at this point where Joseph seems to be at one of his lowest lows. I mean, he's without his family now. He's without any protection from his father, and he's been sold off into a foreign country. And at this point in the story, we have to recognize that there are no heroes. There are no heroes in this story. I mean, Jacob, the father, he created a toxic family situation by choosing a favorite son. And Joseph made things worse by boasting about his favoritism and his dreams that made him seem better than all of his brothers. And his brothers, they gave way to anger and to jealousy, and they sold their brother into slavery. So I ask us again, where is God in this story? I mean, have you noticed? God has not been mentioned once. Up to this point, this seems like just a really sad family situation that does not appear like it's going to have a happy ending. This is why I love the Bible so much, though, because the Bible is realistic. I mean, life can feel like this sometimes, can't it? Well, we will go through events and we'll wonder, where is God? I mean, we may yearn for God to show up in certain circumstances, and all we'll be greeted by is silence. And we'll wonder, okay, is God in this story? Is God a part of my story? Well, here's what we need to affirm today in church, that even though God is not mentioned in the story, that God is at work, that the mysterious providence of God is at hand, that Joseph, he's sold into slavery to the neighboring country of Egypt, and that's exactly where he needs to be for what God wants to do next in the story of humanity. You see, the dream may be deferred, but the dream is not dead. Right now, for us, as we pause the story really acts more like a caution for us, right? We do not want our families to end up like Joseph's.
If you would like more information about Unity Presbyterian Church, please visit our website at www.unitypres.org or visit us on Facebook.
To see Christ working.
This is the Unity Presbyterian Church podcast. Have a great week.
When you allow God's Spirit to really take control of your heart and to move your life, your family is going to take notice of that. And they're going to say, okay, there's something happening here. There's something happening in our family. And I want to really be a part of that. There's a great quote by Desmond Tutu. And he says, you don't choose your family. They are God's gift to you as you are to them. I mean, perhaps that's our biggest takeaway today, is to learn to see your family as God's gift to you, even when they are on your very last nerve. Because your family may have turned out differently than you expected. Perhaps your dreams for them have not yet been realized. But trust that God is at work behind the scenes of your family. Trust that God has given you the family you have with all of its quirks to be a source of joy and support for you. Perhaps the best thing we can do this week is find some time to be alone, just with you and God, and go write down the 5 ways that your family is a gift to you, because God has given them to you specifically. Amen.